a distance, we are instruments marching in the common land, playing songs of hope, playing songs of peace. They're the songs of every man. God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance.
Hey everybody, all is well with you. It's good to be with you once again from a distance on this Wednesday evening. As always, we'll have some parish news and a visitor with us here shortly. But Monsignor, do you want to say hello?
Yes, I do want to say hello. I hope you're all doing well. We've had an interesting week or so here, all kinds of activity, and we have a wonderful guest this evening. Last week we had Tom Ryan, who was the development director, actually the vice president for institutional advancement at the St. Paul Seminary. But we have another Tom, but this is Father Tom, and he'll be with us in a minute, and I can't wait to introduce you to him. He's one of those wonderful priests that you just love to meet.
Great, yeah, wonderful. So just some parish news again first. There's quite a bit happening around both parishes. So just a reminder for St. Ignatius, and obviously for St. Timothy as well. It'd be great to have all of you support in that way too. The Christ Child Luncheon is coming up soon. That is on Friday, December 4th. Obviously, because of COVID, it will look very different this year. It'll be a drive-by pickup, and you can pick it up on Friday, December 4th between 2 and 6 p.m. But you have to pre-order your meal, and those orders are due by Monday, November 30th. All the proceeds go for pro-life causes. Again, you can see more information in the bulletin on the church website, these kind of things. You would get a hot dish that serves between 3 to 4 people, as well as a freshly made loaf of bread. So, and great way to support pro-life causes and get a wonderful meal in the process. That's over at St. Ignatius in Annandale. Also from St. Ignatius, Allie, our youth minister, blessed to have her. She's giving different reflections on Facebook during these times. Tomorrow evening and every Thursday from 8 until 8:30, she is hosting a Plugged In, and she'll be talking about different topics on their faith. I believe tomorrow is about confession and why we go to confession, the importance of it, these kind of things. Again, that'll be tomorrow on Facebook at St. Ignatius's Facebook page from 8 until 8:30 with our youth director, Allie, called Plugged In is the name of that program. We have the Christmas Mass schedule in place. Of course, you'll hear more about that. There's still some time for that, but just briefly here. St. Timothy's Mass is Christmas Eve, 2 p.m., 4:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. Christmas Day, 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and a 12 p.m. parking lot Mass. The Archbishop gave us permission this year and to allow us to have Masses before the usual 4 p.m. time. We'll have Mass at 2 p.m. to accommodate due to the COVID situation, the ability to have more Masses to spread the crowds out. So again, that's the Mass schedule at St. Timothy's. At St. Ignatius, the Masses will be at 3 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve and 9 o'clock a.m. on Christmas Day. Faith formation at St. Timothy's beginning tonight is going to distance learning, just given the number of cases in the area, cases in the public school, and just other factors. St. Timothy's Faith Formation has gone to distance learning beginning tonight. St. Ignatius is still in person over there, so just a little update in that way. The Giving Tree program at St. Timothy's, the angels will be available on the trees this weekend. So again, a great way to support people in need. You'll see more information about that in the bulletin, but as you know, a time to support people during this holiday season ahead, Christmas time coming up here. And again, especially in this COVID times, people may be in need in a special way. So appreciate your support. The angels will be on the trees this weekend at St. Timothy's. Thanksgiving Masses at both parishes at 9 a.m. Again, Thanksgiving Day Masses at both parishes at 9 a.m. And finally, just a reminder, we have this Rejoice program happening here at St. Timothy's, that is. I believe there are still books available at the Exodus of a Church by Father Mark Toops, a great way to spend Advent reading these different reflections, spend time with the Holy Family, walk with them to that first Advent with the Holy Family in Advent. A great way just to especially as we're kind of more shut down in many ways, as we all know. Different activities slowing down. Great time to focus on our faith as life slows down. A great way to fill it up with other things that are going to nourish us and support us, especially during these times. So a great chance. Again, Father Mark Toops, books at the Exeter Church of St. Timothy's called Rejoice with Daily Reflections for Advent. Before we have our visitor for the evening here with us, we have a different visitor here shortly. Her name is Hazel. So.
Father Monsignor, oh
Hi.
my gosh, I'm so happy to be back here. My gosh, I gotta kneel down. I won't even be on the screen. Listen.
This isn't confession, you know.
Oh, well, it could be, but I don't think it should be on TV.
No.
Listen, you had a good chicken dinner, right? Didn't we have fun with the chicken dinner?
It was wonderful.
Let me tell you something. The people at St. Timothy's are amazing. They're so generous. So if you've been getting the bulletin, you've probably seen this. We've got this gift of dinner this Thanksgiving to those in need. Now, it's people who could use a dinner, but it's also people who are isolated and stuck at home alone, who don't get to see their family because of all this COVID stuff. So we're trying to do this outreach to really help people in need, and we're excited about it. The turkey dinner, it's going to be from the V. You know, Harney, he does such a good job. So you can get this turkey dinner. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to bless others with a dinner, and people have been great so far. They're going online to the church website, the Church of St. Timothy's, hit the donate button, and you guys have been awesome. You've been donating money so people could get a dinner, or even a family could get a dinner. Isn't that nice? What a good idea. So the people at St. Timothy's have been donating. We also need some people to help deliver these meals on Thanksgiving. Probably not having a bunch of people over and thinking, well, what can we do? Well, maybe you could deliver the meals. So, but we need some help. Well, this is what we got to do. You got to email the parish office at what else? Parish office at Church of St. Timothy's, right? Don't be calling the office. It's not that the girls don't want to talk to you, but they're really busy, especially with all this COVID stuff. So if you can email, it will be better. So you can email to let us know somebody who could use a meal, and you can email to say you want to help, and then go online to do your donations. Okay, you did such a good job with the chicken dinner. You can do it for this too. So that's pretty awesome. Say, Father, Monsignor, I haven't seen you at the parking lot mass.
I know because I can't drive.
Oh, it's because it's cold. See, Seniori, it's got its privileges, right?
You got it. You
Yeah.
got it.
How long are we going to keep doing that parking lot mass? People have been asking. They want to know.
Bundle up.
That's right.
Bundle up.
We're going to keep doing it?
We are, yeah. So thanks to people like Tricia Manuel and the Knights of Columbus. We're blessed to have wonderful volunteers and helpers in that way, and we're going to keep doing the parking lot mass as long as we need to, which obviously seems to be for some time ahead here. So
You know what? I bring my Aunt Hildy over from Fairhaven, and we get to say the rosary a half hour ahead of time. That's
Beautiful.
really good. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And if it snows heavily, Father Meyer will preach less.
Oh, well, okay. We'll have to see about that. Check
It
the
will
weather
be a
report.
good, strong sermon.
Yeah, I tell you what, we do it. You know what? It's so nice to see so many people out there in the parking lot. And my Aunt Hildy, you know, otherwise she doesn't get out of the house. So she gets the Eucharist, she gets to say the rosary, wave at people, you know, stay safe. It's a great program, and we want to thank Father for doing it. I froze your cajones off last week. Gosh, it was cold. Probably shouldn't say that on TV, but that's okay. I'm from Jersey. Anyway, you guys, you have a great visitor out there. He's going to be awesome. And all right, good night.
See you.
thanks, Hazel. Wonderful. So, yeah, again, we're blessed with just lots happening here. Blessed with so many wonderful people. Blessed with great, generous parishioners in both churches. So, just grateful here. But with that, we'll introduce our visitor who is here with us this evening. His name is Father Tom, as Monsignor mentioned, Father Tom Margavicius. He is the director of liturgy with the Archdiocese. He assists with Hispanic Latino ministry in the Archdiocese as well. He is a former professor at the St. Paul Seminary for homiletics and liturgy. And I'm sure I'm forgetting many other things he
He
did.
was a formator for the priests.
Formator, yes.
For the seminarians preparing to be priests. And he tried to keep the rector in line.
Yeah, that's great. It's wonderful. So, Father Tom, if you want to trade spots with me here.
Come on. There we go.
Great. It's great to have you, Father Tom. Maybe if you want to start, just again, say a little bit more about yourself, your background.
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Well, welcome. Thank you, Monsignor, and thank you, Father Meyer, for having me here. When I was teaching in the seminary, Father Meyer was one of my students, and Monsignor and I were starting at the seminary at the same time. So we've got at least, 15, 17 years of history between all three of us together. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Both my parents were immigrants. The last name, Margavichus, is Lithuanian.
Mhm.
And my father came from the old country. He met my mother in Germany. Both of them were displaced by World War II.
Mhm.
They were in displaced persons camps. They got engaged in Europe. My father came to the States, and then he saved up enough money to send a one-way ticket for my mother to join them.
Wow.
Then they were married in Cleveland, Ohio, and raised 12 kids. So I'm one of 10 boys and 2 girls.
Wow.
Mom and Dad had 5 boys, then the first girl, then me, then the other girl, then 4 more boys. So I'm in the middle of everything. And I like to think that it's because I'm between the 2 girls that I never got married, you know. But all the other 11 got married very happily, and God bless them all, you know.
And the amazing, now Lithuanian. And I remember when I was in the college seminary, and we had a Monsignor O'Donnell, and he told us that back in the Indo-European, what would you say, makeup and languages and so on, there is kind of a historical proof, at least he said, that the Irish, the Celtics, and the Lithuanians are all descendants from the tribe of the Tuatha
The Tuatha
Dé Danann.
Yep.
And I thought to myself, now I'm related to Tom Margavichus. Can you
Yes.
imagine? Here we are. But God has a way of making it all work.
Yes, right. So the Celtics and the Baltics have deep historical roots.
That's right.
And the Celtic language, just like the Lithuanian language, is one of the oldest languages that's still in use in the world. It's now being spoken the same way it has been, unchanged for over 1,000 years.
Wow.
It's an ancient language, and the name Margavichus, I like to say, it's based on the Lithuanian root margis, which means brilliant.
Yeah.
So
There you are. And we don't doubt it a bit. You know what I mean? And then the only thing I know, well, not the only thing, but the one thing I remember from Lithuanian is svekas.
Šveikas.
Svekas.
Yeah.
That is, if you have 2 beers, you cling them.
Yes.
And we've had an opportunity to do that, have we
Yes,
not, Father?
yes, we have indeed, Monsignor, more than once in our 17 years together.
That's great.
Almost, right?
And we're no worse for the wear, if you
Yeah,
will.
somehow we've survived one another.
That's great. That's
Yes,
great.
Yes, right.
But now tell them a little bit about your experience in seminary work, because you've had all that,
Yeah.
and you've been so wonderful with the young men, and then helping them not only to prepare to be priests for those 4 pillars, or now we say the expressions or whatever
Mhm.
of formation, but also in preparing to preach, because it's preach and teach and sanctify are the offices of the priest, and the preaching it comes first.
Mhm.
And you have helped so many of the men
Mhm.
in your time there just to prepare to preach. But I don't want to tell you what to talk about, but I do say, why don't you tell a little bit about your time in the seminary?
Sure, sure. Well, I remember when I was ordained in 1999 by Archbishop Harry Flynn of happy memory,
Mhm.
whom you and I both loved most dearly.
Oh, God, he's wonderful.
When I was ordained just a few months, not quite 1 year into my priesthood, I remember writing a letter to Archbishop Flynn saying, I love priestly ministry, the opportunity to bring the sacraments and to preach the word of God to the faithful in the parish. And yet, as much as I love parish ministry, I still have in me this burning desire to want to teach others how to preach, how to celebrate the sacraments. So if you, Archbishop Flynn, have any need for another teacher in the seminary, I'm just letting you know I have an interest in these areas of liturgy and homiletics. And Archbishop got my letter, and the next time I saw him in person, he came to Nativity Parish in St. Paul, where I was serving, and he said, Father Thomas, I received your letter, and I have to let you know it's not a matter of if, but when you will be sent to teach in the seminary.
Wow.
So somehow that which I had sensed in me, he saw as well.
That's great.
Yep. I remember perhaps perhaps this contributed to it once. I did a funeral at Nativity Parish for the late, um, uh, he was the president at that, the founder of Best Buy, Schultz.
Oh, yes.
Dick Schultz's dad,
Yeah, wow.
senior. And I remember that Mr. Schultz had lived his entire life in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was a billionaire, a wealthy man who created Best Buy, and yet here he wanted to live in the simple neighborhood of St. Paul instead of some fancy mansion.
Sure.
So I came to his bedside when he passed, because I was the young priest serving Nativity Parish, and I remember thinking just the humility of this man and his faith. What a gift that he, who could have lived anywhere, bought any mansion, still was comfortable living in a simple setting because his faith was set on eternal goals. So his wife said, "Father Tom, you were so dear to him at his death that I want you to preach his funeral." And Archbishop Flynn attended that funeral. He presided because Mr. Schultz was such a wealthy contributor to the church. And so Archbishop Flynn got to hear me preach, which is hardly ever a case that a bishop hears another priest preach,
Exactly.
almost always. So I got up there, and I remember my message to this day. I said, "Mr. Schultz closed his eyes and said good night to St. Paul. And he opened his eyes and said good morning to St. Peter."
Wow.
And somehow I think Archbishop Flynn remembered that.
That was
"Father
wonderful.
Thomas, I want you to teach preaching when you go,
Oh,
right?"
and he himself was a
Oh, he's a brilliant
preacher.
preacher,
Oh,
right? Few bishops have his
yeah,
gift.
yeah, he could engage you, and it was powerful,
Mhm.
and he came alive, and then you came alive.
Yes, right.
So it was tremendous. There's so many stories we could tell. We could be
Oh,
talking
you
just
could tell
about them here.
Archbishop stories,
Yeah.
right?
But that's the gift. But then Father Margavicius came to the seminary, and he had all types, including people like Father Meyer here, who has a powerful voice and is a good preacher.
Mhm.
But he helped form these men to know that there's a time to get into the pulpit and a time to get out of the
For
pulpit,
sure,
and you shouldn't have too much long time in between those steps, if you know what I mean.
right?
But get to your point and land the plane and make it something personal and bringing them to Jesus.
It's our own present Holy Father, Pope Francis, in his letter on joy of the gospel, he talked about the need for the homily to retain a certain kind of boundary or limit, because if it goes too long, the Holy Father says, it puts the whole liturgy out of balance.
Right.
Because suddenly now this takes on such a big part, the preacher doesn't know when to stop talking, and then he feels guilty that he preached too long, so he'll use the short Eucharistic prayer, which is supposed to be a high point, So if you preach too long, it puts the liturgy out of balance. And it was Holy Father Pope Francis who said, that's why you keep the homily under a certain amount of time in order to make sure you don't get carried away.
That's right. And I used to tell them, if they get too long, go like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But you really shouldn't. So I'm not encouraging the parishioners to do that. Other Father Myers will send me running. But now in the seminary, what were some of the highlights for you?
I loved working with a young seminarian who came in eager to serve the Lord and the church, but being yet unformed. He has some ideas about what he thinks priesthood is about, what kind of preacher, what kind of liturgy leader he could be. But he opens himself up and says, "Father, help me. I want to learn more." That when a man is pliable, when he's formable, when he trusts God working through imperfect instruments like seminary rectors and professors, when the man opens himself up to however God might be speaking, it's that openness which makes him then receptive to the grace that God wants to work in changing him to make him a better man. And when I saw that, when I saw a man who started at a certain level, open himself up, and by the time he was ordained, he had become a mature and confident preacher, a mature and confident leader of liturgical prayer, that was one of the most rewarding things I saw.
And it's great. And it was, as you said, so many come and answering a call with all the enthusiasm and the eagerness and the desire to do what God wants. But they need people like you and the other formators, teachers, and professors to help them. You're more than a coach. You're helping them form and become more like Christ, the high priest, and helping them to just present themselves in a way that's going to make them attractive to people, not because of their own personality, but because they're instruments of God's work and His love. And if they do that with that kind of humble heart and open themselves up, they're easily able to grow not only in their desire to do more, but in what God expects of those who are going to be serving as His priests.
Yes, that's very well said, Monsignor, because paradoxically, if I could use a 25-cent word
I
here,
can't spell it, but you can use it.
a pair of ducks are swimming by in the water, right? So, if a man, how a man preaches and how he prays the liturgy should both be true to who he is in his personality. Sometimes you occasionally see someone who, when you meet them and talk to them one-on-one, they have a certain kind of style, personality, but when they put on the robes and enter the pulpit or at the altar, it's like a different personality. They put on an affected character. They start behaving a way that they think they're supposed to look or sound, and people sniff that out. They say there's something off about a man who's not comfortable being himself when he's up there at the pulpit or in the altar. And my approach toward both preaching and toward liturgical style is that the same man that you see just walking down the street or talking in the office is the same man that you see when he preaches and when he prays at the altar. There is an integration of life. He doesn't pretend to be somebody different when he's here than when he is there. And so if a man is able to do that, and it takes a certain amount of being comfortable in your own skin. You realize, as you said, it's not about you, but when you try to strip yourself from the experience, you paradoxically get in the way.
Yeah.
You have to just be comfortable being you, even while you make it not about you.
Yeah.
And how is a man able to do that? And it takes a long time for someone to get comfortable in his own skin and to trust his formators, to trust himself and the work of God in his life. And by the way, the faithful in the parish have no small part to help your priests with this. To say, Father, when you said this, it felt so natural, real. I saw the real you up there, and boy, that touched my heart. That gives us priests courage and the ability to continue risk being real with our faithful when we bring the word of God as it's embodied in us.
And we always have to remind ourselves, it's all about authenticity. Now, we're all sinners. We all have our weaknesses. Nobody's perfect. And there's only one or two Fulton machines in this world. But we all have something to give. And if people can see that in us and that we want to help them come closer to the Lord, they know.
Yeah.
And they help us be better priests.
They sure do. They sure do. So just like in any family, the father, the dad of the family, everyone knows he's not perfect. But in fact, they don't expect him to be. They expect him to be the genuine article, to really try when you make a mistake to apologize, to pick up, move on, and improve, and lead us in the way that you think God is calling us to. And when the man is genuine and real, the whole family flourishes. And that's what the case with priests too.
And it's just so important, I think, because we talk so much about the servant leader, and that's what we're called to be. But it takes a little humility, and it might take a lot of humility, to be able to say, well, I'm going to allow myself to let these people help me to be a better priest.
Yes.
And you can see by the people if they're reacting to. I'm up in this parish and I see that people love their priest here. They would canonize Father Meyer tomorrow. Now they didn't talk to me, or they wouldn't say that right away. But they have this great regard, and it's partly because you're there for them and they know it, and they're there for you and you get to feel it. And once that starts to gel, it's the perfect answer for a community of faith, because you help each other just grow in the faith.
Yeah, that's for sure. Every parish loves it when they know the priest loves God and loves them. It doesn't take a whole lot. As you mentioned, there's only so many Fulton Sheens in the world. There are a lot of priests, and there are a lot of good and faithful men who both love God and love their people. They show up and are the real deal. And when the faithful see that, we say, Father, that's who we need you to be. We don't need you to be someone else. We don't need you to pretend or to wish or to play any kind of games. Just be yourself, love God and love us, and we'll be with you.
That's tremendous. I remember that from my old pastor when I was just a young boy. And I think that was part of the reason I thought about being a priest. He was old. It was a struggle for him even sometimes to say Mass. But you just saw the determination in him that he wanted to do that. And with all the struggles there, he came across that he was doing it for his people. And that made it real, you know?
Yes.
But now, Father Meyer, you ask Father, you don't have the opportunity too often to ask your former professor a little bit about what he thinks.
Well, I guess I'd be curious. I'm sure people are curious too about the whole COVID thing, and with your work for the Archdiocese and liturgy office, it's very, very challenging. I'm sure in a lot of ways, but especially at this whole COVID time, you've been having to navigate all the different guidelines and how we apply them in the churches and these kind of things. I'm going to share, I guess, first maybe just about your work in the liturgy office in general, ignoring COVID, and then maybe if you want to speak to the whole COVID reality and what that's looked like in your work at the liturgy office.
Sure. Well, Monsignor, as a canon lawyer, you know that Canon 2 in the Code of Canon Law says, in general, there are lots of liturgical laws. You won't find them, for the most part, in this code. You got to go to the liturgical books.
Okay.
Well, there's liturgical law in the general instruction of the Roman Missal, in electionary, in the order for matrimony, and for baptism, and RCIA. So all the liturgical books have their own, and it gets to be a lot of work juggling all of these different sources. Most parish staff, priests and lay workers included, don't have the luxury to sift through all of these other liturgical documents to try to find the answers to sometimes uncommon questions that you never come across. So they call up the office of worship. They say, Father Margavicius, here's the situation. I've never faced this before. Can we have, for example, this is one we just faced this week. Because of COVID, the godparents of the baby at the baptism are not comfortable coming to the church. Is it permissible for the godparents to be represented in the baptism by proxies? Now, that's the kind of a specialized question that not a whole lot of parish staff, and frankly, many priests and deacons wouldn't have a ready answer for. It's my job to go in the office of worship and say, yes, I've looked at the documents. It is permissible for godparents to be represented by proxies at the baptism itself. They're still the godparents, even though they're not there. Their proxies will fill in for them. So those are the kinds of questions in the office of worship that it's my job to know and to sort through and help people figure out.
And thank God they got somebody with a brain like you that can sort all of that. I remember when I was first a priest, and we're out, and then you have the altar boys, and you're preparing them for all of these different ceremonies. Later, I was the bishop's secretary, but I'm talking about early on. And I said, well, what were we supposed to do? when we went through the practice once, I said, here it is. We're not going to be here all night. This is how we're doing it. And the basic rule is, when in doubt, genuflect. And that's what I told them. And to keep your hands folded this way, and it'll all work out all right. And I got through with that, you know. But I wouldn't recommend that now for the Archbishop for the ceremony
No,
there.
right. Well, in fact, it was, our time together, 15 years together on staff, when I would teach not only homiletics, we haven't talked much about my teaching liturgy.
Yeah.
That was even a bigger part of my academic load than the teaching of preaching, was the teaching of liturgy. So over the course of our 15 years, I began to accumulate a library of liturgical reference books.
Exactly.
Now, as it would be, that set me up beautifully to serve in the office of worship, because now I've got my own library, and because we're all officing in remote locations, I don't go into the chancery very often. I've got my entire liturgical library in my rectory where I live, so that I can do most of my work, and I'll go to the book and I'll look it up and I'll give. So it's a beautiful opportunity that the material that I'd learned in our time in the seminary still serves the Archdiocese, even though I don't have the opportunity to go to the office at the Chancery. I'm still able to do virtually all of my work in remote.
And he could find an answer to a question. He just pulls the book off the shelf, and then he knows exactly where to go.
That's true.
I would tumble those books off the shelf.
Right.
But when you said that about now, Monsignor Rolfs, who's at the seminary as a spiritual director and had been the rector of Mount St. Mary, and he's quite a character and very brilliant, and his area was moral theology.
Yes.
And I remember as a young priest, we'd have him into the diocese to give talks to our priests on moral theology, and he held them captivated. But I remember visiting him at the seminary. Now, he had a few, that was his work and his life, that moral theology. And then he had some hobbies, if you will, and things that he liked. So in his room in the rector's apartment in the seminary, the one wall would be all moral theology volumes and books and tomes, etc. It was all there. It was as big as the Vatican Library. Then on this wall, he had the royalty, because he had this great thing for English royalty. Right. So from Queen, whatever, all the way down to the present moment, he could tell you what they wore, what they drink, and what they eat. And then over here on this wall, he had a good fork, as the Italians would say, and he loved cooking. Mm-hmm. And they were all cookbooks, and he could be one of those chefs that go on and do it, because he could tell you anything about it. But it's the most amazing thing. And he reminded me in that way of you, because that was your wall too. I remember visiting down in your office at the seminary, and he had everything just so organized. It was right, not a thing out of place, and he could pick a book off, and you knew exactly what he was going to tell you about it. So we had a good staff, Father. You would agree.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, one of the other things you asked, and I'll mention briefly, is about the COVID situation.
Yeah.
Now, Monsignor Rolfs, as you mentioned, was a brilliant moral theologian.
Right.
Now, there are people who are not happy. Well, okay. Everybody is unhappy with COVID.
Yeah.
It inconveniences all of our lives.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. And so some people, when they see the restrictions, for example, that the state of Minnesota wants us to wear masks, and some people complain about this, and Archbishop Hebda says, let's cooperate with the governor and wear the masks like he asks. And some people will then say, I don't agree with that. I don't think that we should be wearing masks. And it was, in fact, going to the liturgical documents about the church's teaching authority. The church, when she teaches truth, will not err in matters of morals and faith. But it doesn't say anything about the church expertise in matters of science or medicine. This is not the church's domain. So the Archbishop has decided, I will defer to the medical staff of the Minnesota Department of Health.
Right.
And if the medical staff says wearing masks helps, then we will cooperate with that. And some people will occasionally complain to Archbishop Hebda, how come you're not standing up for the truth? And the answer is, there's nothing immoral about wearing a mask.
Right.
It's not a denial of the faith.
Right.
The church speaks up for the matters of faith and morals. When it comes to science or medicine, we defer to those who have expertise in that way. And this is why Archbishop is asking us to cooperate. So it's that kind of theological clarity.
Right.
What exactly are we teaching about the need to guard ourselves in the time of COVID? There are certain things which none of us likes to do, but is it a matter of faith and morals? No, it's just inconvenient. It's just an irritation. Maybe I don't like the science of it, whatever, but it's not a matter of faith and morals. And so for that reason, the Archbishop is asking us to cooperate for the good of all the people.
That's right. And it's not only for your own protection, but it's so that you don't give something which could harm another person.
Right.
And so if we could help offset that, nobody I don't like to wear a mask. It gets my nose, it drives me crazy. And I have a big nose. But you wear it because that's it's giving good example too,
Yes. Yes.
One thing we were talking about earlier before the show is, of course, we all heard the unfortunate news today that, understandable, but unfortunate news, the bars and restaurants are closing and these kind of things, which is obviously unfortunate in so many ways, but the church hasn't affected us yet, and that's hopefully largely because we have been trying to respect the rules and set the guidelines. There hasn't been any hotspots in the churches, as far as I know, and that's
right.
So it's
right. It's a surprise. I mean, you might remember back in May there was a slight tete-a-tete between the Archbishop and the Governor Walz. When the governor said, "I can open up restaurants and shopping places to 50% capacity, but churches you still have to stay at 25 people." And when that happened in the middle of May, the Archbishop said, that seems discriminatory, unjustly so, because you have no evidence that what's going on in churches is any more dangerous than what's going on at Target or at the local restaurant. And as it turned out, over the course of the summer, we've learned, in fact, the opposite is true, that in churches, people are tending to be more compliant, using hand sanitizer, wearing the mask, keeping 6 feet distance. And because of that, we have learned over the past 3 or 5 months, churches have not become hot spots of COVID super spreading. On the contrary, people are generally safer in churches than most other social settings, which is why today's governor's statement, even bars and restaurants, we're going to have to shut you down, but churches you could keep open because the scientific data shows you are behaving according to good science here, and we respect you for that.
And in the other sense, it's just what you think are essential, and there are many essential things, and going to church, and let's just make it, I'm not anti bars or restaurants. I've frequented a few, and especially when I was young in the area I came from, coal miners, there was a church on one side of the street and there was a bar on the other.
Oh, Lithuanians as well.
That's the way. But you know what? I think it's more important that you have the opportunity to go to confession, that you might miss a beer once in a while. I think there's something that way too,
Yes, right.
Yeah, so that's great. And maybe if you want to just share a little bit more about liturgy, I don't know, maybe some principles of for the people at home, just talking about what liturgy is all about, what sacrifice the mass. I don't know, just anything you want to.
And on that line too, I would want to ask you to just address the thing, because we're the church and the council have encouraged us to be actively participating in the liturgy. It's not a show. We're not going to the opera. It's how we're going to all be around the altar celebrating. And sometimes we can get into those extremes, whereas I think it's always important, and I would hope that we try to prepare our priests and young priests, especially, to realize that it's a parish, their parish, and you have to bring everybody around the altar in a way that it's going to help them lift their hearts and minds to God and not be worried about, how much incense you're putting in that incense. I love incense, but that's not the essential.
Right. The documents of Vatican II, the 16 documents that came out of the council, mentioned the phrase full and active participation in the liturgy over 25 times. Right. It just shows up again and again and again. And the interesting thing is, this is not an original idea with Vatican II. Right. Pope Pius XII wrote about that exact same phrase, full and active participation in the liturgy, in his 1947 document, Mediator Dei. But he didn't originate it either. You've got to go all the way back to Pope St. Pius X in 1903, when he wrote a document about singing at the liturgy, Tre la sollecitudine. And what Pope St. Pius X said was, I don't want people to sing at Mass. I want them to sing the Mass. In other words, music is not an imposition from outside upon an already pre-existing document. Right. That the liturgy is intended to be sung. You don't put singing into it, you sing it. Yeah. And it's a difference between like singing a song and walking down the hallway while singing it. Yeah. If music is part of what you're doing, then you're going to go about liturgy in a different way. Singing engages you. Now, the irony is, of course, nowadays we can't sing because it makes, expelling all of the breath particles more difficult. Right? We can hum behind it. It'll pass. It'll pass. But the whole point that Pope St. Pius X was trying to say was liturgy is not a spectator sport. You don't sit back and let the professional musicians do it while you just kind of sit in your pew or, meditate on a holy book or close your eyes or doze off, or the ushers going in the vestibule to have a cigarette. Yeah. Remember those days, right?
Yeah, I think I do.
So the point is that liturgy is supposed to engage us. In fact, the word liturgy is a Greek compound word. The first part, L-I-T, comes from the same root as we get laity. Mm-hmm. And the second part, ergy, is the same root that gives us the part of energy. Yeah. So the word liturgy means people work. Now that can be understood in two regards. First of all, God working for the people. Mm-hmm. It's what God does to save us. Liturgy is how God works salvation in our soul. But it's not just something we sit back and say, okay, God, you do all the work. It's also what the people are doing. We are the ones engaging the activity. We stand, we kneel, we process, and we say the prayers. We engage one another in the sign of peace and the greetings and with your spirit. So the idea behind the back and forth dialogues is precisely so that the people are engaged in the activity. So liturgy is something that happens to them and is something they do. It's both of these happening together. And this is what Pope Benedict XVI, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, wrote a beautiful book called Spirit of the Liturgy. He talked about the two sides of liturgy, the side coming down from God and the side going up toward God, the side which God does for us and the side which we do. And both of those actions happening simultaneously form the synergy. Liturgy is what God is doing and we are doing simultaneously. And it's instead of sitting back and letting God do all the work, well, that would be just pacifism, or thinking that we're the ones who have, this is Pelagianism. Instead, it's us doing our part, but realizing that when God does his part, that's the salvific part. That's what liturgy is. It's the engagement of all of the people in the act of God.
And it's so uplifting if it's done well.
It is.
Yeah, because you know it because there's a certain uh, atmosphere and air about it that just makes your heart swell.
Well, I don't know about you, Monsignor, or Father Myers. Sometimes when I, as a priest, put on the vestments and walk out into the sanctuary, I might not feel particularly engaged on a particular day.
Right.
I'm distracted, or I didn't get enough sleep, or I'm feeling a little sick, or I've got,
Yeah.
all sorts of reasons that it's hard for me to get into it. But just because I don't feel like it doesn't mean I check out.
Right.
In fact, I show up, I do my part, I say, this is what the liturgy demands of me. And when I give myself to it, even though I sometimes might feel a little less engaged, God takes that sacrifice and makes something of it. And I think that's true among the faithful.
Oh, yeah.
You show up at Mass, you have to wear the mask, you're grumbling about that. Your kids are a little bit ornery this morning. I didn't want to have to drag them out of bed. This is, okay, now we got that guest priest and I don't understand a word he's saying and I can't, you just feel like unengaged. But when you show up and you give yourself anyway, despite that, it counts for
That's
something.
right. And right. And the Lord, and that's what He wants. You're just there with Him and celebrating.
Yeah. Yep, it's credited to Woody Allen, although no one knows for sure if he said it, but the famous phrase, half of life is just showing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You put in your time. You show up, you give yourself, even though you feel like I'm not quite fully engaged, but you give it your best. People see that, and what's more, God sees it. And it matters. It matters.
That's great.
Yeah. We're getting kind of close to the end of time here. I don't know if any thing we didn't ask you about you want to share, anything you want to talk about. I know there's actually, I just recalled there's a consecration of St. Joseph. The St. Joseph year is coming up there. Archdiocese announced that.
Well, I did bring a little bit of a show and tell here. I'll hold this book a little closer to the camera so you can take a look at it. The consecration to St. Joseph by an Irishman, Monsignor.
Yes.
His name is Callaghan.
Callaway.
He's a priest of missionary fathers of the Immaculate Conception. He just wrote this book. It came out this year, 2020. It's based upon the similar model of the 33 days consecration to the Blessed Virgin Mary, or 33 days to glory. This is 33 days of preparing to consecrate yourself to St. Joseph. 150 years ago this year, in 1870, Pope Pius IX, Pio Nono,
Yeah.
Pius IX wrote a document
Blessed.
about St. Joseph.
Yeah.
And on December 8th, 1870, Pope Pius IX dedicated the entire church under the patronage of St. Joseph as the universal patron of the church. So this being the 150th anniversary of that, it's the desire of Archbishop Hebda that our entire archdiocese also be consecrated to St. Joseph. So at the 7 p.m. Mass on Tuesday, December 8th, at the Cathedral of St. Paul, Archbishop Hebda will formally consecrate the entire archdiocese to St. Joseph. And it will begin our year of St. Joseph from December 8th, 2020 until December 8th, 2021. The entire year will be dedicated to St. Joseph in various ways. So individual members of parishes are invited to make your own consecration to St. Joseph, perhaps using a book like this or similar formats. Maybe visit parishes dedicated to St. Joseph, or to pray a novena to St. Joseph, or various other ways that we might seek his patronage during this extraordinary year of St. Joseph. So this is something that I'm happy to be a part of in the planning and preparation, and invite all of the faithful of the Archdiocese to learn more about this wonderful patron. If Joseph was good enough for God to entrust his two most precious gifts, his own son and his blessed mother, to St. Joseph, then Joseph's good enough for you and me.
That's wonderful. And school in grade school had the Sisters of St. Joseph of Chestnut Hill.
Mhm.
And we learned more about St. Joseph. He didn't say a word in the Gospels, but the nuns made up for it, let me tell you. We heard all about St. Joseph. So I think it's a wonderful time to just recognize the simplicity of the man, the hardworking, the just man, and we talk about integrity. You don't get better than St. Joseph.
Well, you've always had a strong affection for him. And when we were at the seminary together, you were part of the planning and implementation of a statue dedicated to St. Joseph
right.
that was installed at the
That's
seminary. And on the bottom of that statue in Latin, it says, Ite ad Joseph, which is Latin for go to Joseph, which is taken from the book of Genesis. Remember the story of the 12 sons
Yes.
of Jacob, and the youngest was Joseph, who had the multicolored, coat, and he was the dreamer. And then his brothers sold him off into slavery, and he went to Egypt. And then, meanwhile, the rest of the world was in famine. And then Jacob said to his brothers in Israel, I heard that, Joseph has got some food over in Egypt. Go to Joseph.
Yes.
And the church has re-understood that anew in the terms of Saint Joseph. Go to Joseph. One of the remarkable things, here Jesus as a baby is threatened by Herod. And God entrusts saving the baby Jesus to Joseph. So Joseph was the savior of the savior.
Wow.
Isn't that a beautiful idea? Wonderful things like that in this book, and I think the church will benefit greatly by his intercession and patronage in this coming year.
Well, I think, Father, before we close out here, I want to thank Father Tom for not only this wonderful inspirational evening, but when priests get together and we're able to do this, it's uplifting. And we always have a closing prayer or song on this program, Father. And I would think the one that we're picking for tonight, if Father can find it, is it would express what you do so often for so many of us in life as priests. And brother priests, we have to support each other. It's a unique fraternity. And if we can lift each other up, it's so good. So I want to thank you. So could we do that, Father?
Yeah.
You probably recognize it, Father, if we get this working here. When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdens me, then I am still and wait here in silence till you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulder. Raise me up to more than I can be. Sounds Irish. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. love more than I can be.